We're counting down the 10 U.S. cities teetering on the edge of financial collapse in the 2025 housing crisis. From overbuilt boomtowns cracking under the weight of empty homes to places where insurance bills cost more than rent, these cities have found creative new ways to self-destruct. Each entry unpacks a different economic pitfall: municipal missteps, investor stampedes, or just good old-fashioned denial. But which city faces the steepest fall from grace? Let's kick off the countdown with number 10. Phoenix, Arizona. Once the poster child for runaway growth, now finds itself staring at a wall of empty homes and a mortgage market that's gone ice cold. Between 2020 and 2022, city officials handed out building permits like candy on Halloween, fueling a construction frenzy that left thousands of new homes competing for buyers. But by 2025, the party was over. Mortgage rates shot past 7%, turning the dream of homeownership into a punchline for anyone making less than six figures. Wages barely budged while monthly payments doubled. Inventory soared. By spring, listings in the outer suburbs had piled up by nearly 40%. The result? Home prices tumbled by more than 20% in some fringe zip codes, with non-prime borrowers leading a spike in delinquencies. For many, the math just stopped working. Paychecks couldn't keep up with exploding costs, and the oversupply meant sellers had to slash prices or watch their homes sit. Phoenix's boom turned into a cautionary tale, proof that you can't build your way out of a crisis when no one can afford the keys. Cape Coral, Florida, once a magnet for sun-seekers and speculators, now faces a housing freeze with a uniquely Floridian twist: insurance. Here, the collapse isn't about too many homes or runaway lending. It's about the simple fact that you can't buy what you can't insure. Since 2022, a parade of carriers has packed up and left, spooked by flood maps and hurricane models that get scarier every year. The result? Annual premiums that used to hover around $2,500 now routinely top $8,000, if you can even find a policy. Citizens, Florida's insurer of last resort, has watched its policy count triple, ballooning past 1.5 million statewide. The waterfront dream home, once a status symbol, has turned into a financial anchor. By spring 2025, listings in Cape Coral's flood-prone neighborhoods jumped 60%, with sellers desperate to unload homes that buyers can't afford to cover. Mortgage lenders, not eager to take on uninsured risk, have started walking away from deals. In Cape Coral, it's not a glut of houses or a shortage of buyers. It's the insurance bill that's driving people out and locking the door behind them. Orange County, California built its fiscal house on a foundation of ever-rising property values, convinced that the good times would roll on forever. For years, sky-high home prices, now north of $900,000 for the median, poured billions into county coffers, with almost 92% of general revenue tied to property taxes. But there's a catch that would make even the most optimistic accountant wince. Orange County only gets to keep 5 cents of every property tax dollar, the lowest share of any county in California. So while the overall budget has ballooned to $10.8 billion for 2025, and property tax revenues are actually up by $72 million, the county's hands are tied by state mandates and rising costs. Department heads are quietly axing 163 vacant jobs and bracing for more cuts, all while inflation and pension obligations eat away at the bottom line. The property market has cooled, sales down nearly 8%, office vacancies climbing, but the real pain isn't from a dramatic crash, it's from a chronic mismatch. The county's wealth is vast, but the money that actually reaches public services is a rounding error. In Orange County, the tax windfall is always just out of reach, leaving leaders to juggle belt-tightening with billion-dollar budgets. Collapse? Not this year. But the stress fractures are showing, and no one's getting rich off the spare change. Atlanta's housing market is living proof that Wall Street can turn a city into a playground, then abandon it without so much as a goodbye note. Between 2020 and 2024, private equity firms snapped up over 45,000 homes in the metro area, transforming entire neighborhoods into rental empires overnight. Rents soared, up 14% on average after these big players moved in, while maintenance complaints from tenants jumped 40%, as if fixing leaky pipes was beneath the pay grade of a hedge fund. By 2025, the music stopped. Investors, spooked by flattening returns and rising interest rates, started dumping properties as quickly as they'd bought them. The result? A whiplash for renters and would-be buyers alike. Rents plateaued, then sagged, but not before squeezing thousands of families past the breaking point. Median household incomes couldn't keep up with the cost blowout, and debt-to-income ratios for new buyers shot past 43%. In Atlanta, the real estate roller coaster is powered not by local demand, but by the whims of distant financiers, leaving residents to pick up the pieces when the ride goes off the rails. Denver's housing market spent the pandemic years on a sugar high, fueled by remote work fantasies and a stampede of out-of-state buyers convinced they'd found their forever mountain view. By 2022, home prices in the metro area had soared more than 35% above pre-pandemic levels, as bidding wars became a local pastime. Then the hangover hit. As remote work dreams faded and mortgage rates climbed, the same newcomers who once flooded open houses started packing up for cheaper pastures. The result? By mid-2025, Denver's median home price had dropped 12% from its peak. Days on market for listings tripled, with sellers waiting an average of 54 days for a nibble. Developers, late to read the room, are still delivering over 12,000 new units this year, most of which now compete for a dwindling pool of buyers. Inventory has piled up, and price cuts are the new normal. Denver's so-called boom didn't end with a bang, but with a slow, awkward shuffle toward the exits. A textbook case of what happens when demand evaporates faster than you can say work from home. Las Vegas, once the city where fortunes could change overnight, just learned that the house doesn't always win, especially when it comes to housing. In 2024, the short-term rental gold rush hit a wall that even the most optimistic Airbnb host couldn't ignore. On what should have been the busiest weekend of the year, Formula One, the event that had local officials dreaming of record profits, Airbnb occupancy limped in at 38%. For comparison, the same weekend in 2022 saw 92% of those units booked solid. Turns out, when everyone buys a second home to cash in on tourists, nobody makes money except the cleaning crews. Stories of quick riches have been replaced by tales of owners scrambling to cover mortgages. Take the couple who closed on a Henderson condo in spring 2023, convinced that five-figure rental weekends were a sure thing. By mid-2024, they were lucky to break even, with monthly expenses outpacing rental income for 6 straight months. Multiply that by thousands of similar units across the valley, and the result is a tidal wave of cash flow negative owners who can't rent, can't sell, and definitely can't refinance. The city's dependence on tourism turned into a liability the moment demand dried up. Tax receipts from short-term rentals fell by double digits, leaving City Hall with fewer chips to play. Second home sales, once a growth engine, have stalled. In Las Vegas, the housing market's fragility isn't just about prices or supply. It's about what happens when speculative demand evaporates and everyone is left holding the same losing bet. Boise, Idaho, once the darling of pandemic-era migration, decided to supercharge its growth with a tax incentive giveaway that would make even the most generous city council blush. Local officials dangled more than $50 million in incentives in front of developers, all on the promise of a semiconductor-fueled jobs boom. 20,000 new positions, according to the glossy press releases. The reality? Just 1,100 jobs materialized, leaving the city with a vacancy rate in new commercial and mixed-use buildings that now hovers above 14%. Developers, sensing easy money, raced to break ground on luxury apartments and office towers. The only thing missing was actual demand. By 2025, the city's skyline had sprouted more cranes than new residents, and the promised tech workforce never arrived. Meanwhile, vacancy rates in these shiny new projects soared past 18% in some districts, while affordable housing remained as elusive as ever. The public sector, having bought into a fantasy job forecast, now faces a glut of empty buildings and a budget hole that can't be filled with wishful thinking. For many Boiseans, the incentives were supposed to deliver prosperity. Instead, they got a front-row seat to a speculative trap. The gap between policy and reality has left the city's economy exposed, its housing market out of sync, and local taxpayers footing the bill for a growth story that never happened. In Boise, the lesson is clear. When you gamble on big promises without real oversight, you can end up with a lot of empty space and even emptier hopes. Tampa's housing market, once a magnet for sun-chasing retirees and remote workers, now wears the dubious crown of ghost listing capital. The numbers don't lie. Mortgage delinquencies in the metro have doubled to 6% in just 12 months, and more than 9,000 homes are sitting in limbo. Technically for sale, but with no real buyers and no realistic path to closing. These are the so-called ghost listings, properties abandoned by owners who can't keep up with payments, but that banks and brokers can't move because nobody can afford the true cost of ownership. The culprit isn't just sticker shock on home prices, it's the financial quicksand beneath them. After a wave of insurer exits in late 2023, force-placed insurance premiums have added an average of $400 a month to mortgage bills across flood-prone neighborhoods. Lenders, desperate to protect their collateral, have tightened underwriting to the point where even buyers with strong credit struggle to get approved. Sellers, meanwhile, are trapped. Dropping the price doesn't help when buyers can't qualify for financing, or when the monthly carrying cost is now higher than a luxury lease in Miami. For families already stretched thin, one missed payment can tip the balance. The result is a market frozen by gridlock. Homeowners can't sell, buyers can't buy, and lenders can't unload their growing inventory of non-performing loans. In Tampa, the American dream has been replaced by a waiting game, one where nobody wins, and the only thing moving is the number of homes slipping into delinquency. Downtown St. Louis once buzzed with the promise of a second act. City leaders pitched a vision of empty office towers reborn as vibrant apartments, hoping to lure back residents and plug holes in the tax base. But in 2025, the city's big conversion dreams look more like a cautionary tale. The numbers tell the story. More than 2,300 jobs vanished after Centene, Express Scripts, and Bayer packed up and left. That single wave of corporate exits alone punched a $20 million hole in annual tax collections, a gap the city hasn't come close to filling. Developers once courted with tax breaks and ribbon cuttings have mostly vanished too. Office-to-housing conversions that were supposed to save downtown now sit half-finished, their windows covered in dust and plywood. Of the 5,000 new apartments City Hall promised, fewer than 1,550 are actually under construction, and only 850 broke ground last year, a 10-year low. Instead of a housing boom, St. Louis got a skyline of stalled projects and empty promises, while suburban St. Charles quietly siphons away families and jobs. The fallout is everywhere. Condo prices in the city core are now 7% below their 2007 peak, erasing nearly 2 decades of supposed progress. Owners who bought at the wrong time are stuck with underwater mortgages, while would-be buyers watch prices fall but hesitate to jump in, wary of more corporate departures in the city's shrinking services. Meanwhile, the blight spreads. Unfinished towers, vacant ground floors, and a downtown that feels emptier with every passing month. For St. Louis, the crisis isn't just about lost jobs or falling prices, it's about dead capital. Buildings that once generated taxes and paychecks now drain resources, and every failed conversion is a reminder that wishful thinking can't patch a budget. The city's gamble on office-to-housing dreams has left it with the worst of both worlds. Not enough homes, not enough jobs, and a fiscal hole that keeps getting deeper. The lesson, as always, is that when demand disappears, so does the money, and no amount of optimistic planning can fill the gap left behind. In Memphis, the numbers aren't just bad, they're biblical. By spring 2025, eviction filings have soared 80% over the previous year, flooding the courts with desperate tenants and landlords who look almost as shell-shocked as the people they're trying to evict. The city's rental market, once held together by a patchwork of small landlords, is unraveling at the seams. It's not just tenants who are losing their homes, it's the people who own the homes losing them too. Take the case of a veteran landlord who spent 15 years renting to families in South Memphis. He started with 2 duplexes, worked his way up to 38 units, a local success story until the math turned against him. Like many others, he refinanced in the boom years with interest-only loans, betting that rents would keep climbing and that he'd have time to pay down the principal later. That bet came due in 2025. When the reset notice arrived, his monthly payments jumped 45% overnight. Suddenly, collecting rent wasn't enough to cover the bills, especially with tenants falling behind in droves. Within 3 months, he was fielding calls from the bank, not the plumber. Foreclosure papers hit his mailbox before he could even process the first round of evictions. This isn't just one man's story, it's the new reality for Memphis's working-class rental market. Small landlords who own more than half the city's rental stock are buckling under the weight of higher payments and shrinking rent rolls. As interest-only periods expire across the city, hundreds of owners face the same impossible choice: raise rents on tenants who are already stretched to the breaking point, or eat the losses and risk losing their properties. Most can't do either. The result? A chain reaction. Tenants evicted, homes left vacant, and lenders scrambling to unload foreclosed properties in a market where buyers have all but vanished. The city's eviction docket reads like a disaster report. In some neighborhoods, entire blocks are dotted with eviction notices and boarded-up windows. Legal aid groups are overwhelmed, turning away families who have nowhere else to go. School attendance is down as families bounce between relatives' couches and motel rooms. Meanwhile, the rental market is stuck in a death spiral. More evictions mean more vacancies, which mean lower property values, which mean even more landlords heading for the exits. What pushed Memphis to the top of this list isn't just the number of people losing their homes. It's the speed and scale of the collapse. The interest-only loan reset, once pitched as a clever way to maximize cash flow, has become a financial guillotine for the city's rental economy. As the dominoes fall, there's no cavalry coming. Not from the banks, not from the city, and definitely not from Washington. For Memphis, the so-called affordable housing market has become a revolving door. Tenants out, landlords out, and hope out with them. From Phoenix's overbuilding blunder to Memphis's eviction avalanche, this countdown of 10 U.S. cities on the brink reveals a housing crisis that's anything but one size fits all. The list laid bare how cities stumbled for different reasons. Some, like Cape Coral, were undone by climate-driven insurance chaos, while others, such as Atlanta and Boise, fell victim to unchecked investor speculation and failed public incentives. At the top, Memphis and St. Louis showed the real human toll: mass evictions, foreclosures, and neighborhoods hollowed out by economic missteps. What ties these cities together isn't just collapsing home values, but the relentless pressure of high interest rates, stagnant wages, and municipal decisions that aged about as well as milk in the sun. The ranking criteria made clear: the higher the household distress, market gridlock, and visible economic fallout, the higher the risk. Across all 10, the pattern is unmistakable. When policy, profit, and reality collide, it's everyday residents left picking up the pieces. In 2025, the so-called American dream home is looking less like a promise and more like a cautionary tale.